And so we've come to the second to last big MCU product for 2017, with Punisher being the last in a few weeks, which I will not review because I've just lost all interest in the Marvel Netflix stuff, and I'll just watch it if I ever, by a very, very slim chance, ever get the urge to. But for me, this is the last Marvel thing, specifically from the Disney Marvel, that I'm going to be watching this year. And if you've been following some of my videos across the year, you know I've been kind of fairly excited for this movie because of the style that it portrayed, some of the potential it had story-wise. And after seeing the movie, and I'm gonna try to be as spoiler-free as I possibly can, but there is kind of some stuff that will imply certain events in the movie that I just have to bring up at least vaguely because this is kind of a hard movie to talk about without at least implying a spoilerish sort of thing. So if that bothers you, you should probably stop watching this immediately and then go watch the movie. Or if you just don't care, keep watching if that's your deal. So Thor Ragnarok is a really weird movie. I think it's the best Phase 3 movie, but that's not really saying much. I've not been a fan of Phase 3 at all. I think Civil War and Guardians Volume 2 are legitimately bad movies. Doctor Strange is good, but it's once again too much of a knockoff of Iron Man, which kind of really annoys the shit out of me. And yeah, and Spider-Man Homecoming was fine, but it was just fine. And this one is, I think, the best one, but it's still not anywhere close to the peak of Phase 2. In terms of quality and in terms of kind of style, I would call this movie closer to Guardians 1 than Guardians 2, but there is some Guardians 2 level bullshit in here. And this is a really fascinating kind of movie because the script for this is obviously Thor the Dark levels of bland and forgettable, but the people who are bringing the material to life are doing it with such style and such energy. They make you think this is a much better movie than it actually is. And I don't mean this in the Civil War sense. Like, Civil War is an actual bad movie that barely makes any fucking sense when you actually try to dig deep into it, and it gets even worse when you consider previous MCU continuity. But this is a movie that's just kind of okay on the script level. Nothing excels whatsoever in the script or in the final product in the story, but nothing is so horrendously botched that makes you want to blow your brains out. It's the Thor the Dark level writing, but the people they've assembled elevate it or make the material much more interesting, more snappy, and much more energetic than it could have been. And I think a lot of it comes down to Taika Waititi. A lot of people say that if another director did a particular series, they wouldn't be the same. And I think this movie is one of the best examples of that. Like, if anybody else did this movie, it would be just as bleh as Thor the Dark World was. Like, if Alan Taylor was brought back to do this movie, it would be just as bland and whatever the fuck as The Dark World was. But Taika Waititi approaches this with the same kind of zaniness of Guardians of the Galaxy, with his own different brand of humor, and the end result is a movie that's kind of like a 5 or 6 on a script level, elevated to a 7, maybe an 8 at its biggest highs, rarely. But I still do not consider this a particularly great film. And a lot of it comes down to its vapid ambition. And what do I mean by this? I mean by this is that when the movie was being marketed initially, it looked like it was going to be a movie that was going to do a lot of really ambitious things with the Thor property. And it kind of does them, but a lot of it doesn't mean anything. This is a really weird movie where there are a lot of status quo changes. There are a lot of really big revelations for the Thor corner of the MCU. There are a lot of changes that occur as the movie is completed, and overall, the entire status quo for Thor moving forward is put in a really, really different situation than it's ever been in. In fact, I've never really thought the MCU would go as far as they have here with this kind of scorched earth, kind of quasi-reboot direction that this movie clearly is. But a lot of the ambition is kind of superficial. It's not really about being ambitious with Thor's storyline or its characters or anything. It's more about being ambitious with the style of the movies. What can it do to spice things up? What can it do to make it more, on a surface level, interesting? And they kind of succeeded that. But if you're expecting a movie that kind of finally makes a Thor movie narrative be worth a fuck, I don't think this is that. And there are quite a few issues like in the script concerning that, because this is very clearly two completely different movies smashed together. I honestly think that if you cut out Hulk and you reworked Hela's whole invasion of the other worlds thing, you could very easily cut out Hulk and Valkyrie and Scourge completely out of this movie, make a new second act, and I really don't think much of the film would be different. And like I said, because this is very clearly two different movies smashed together, you have this situation where the Thor stuff is fine and the Hulk stuff is fine, and neither of it is great, and neither of it gets in the other's way, but none of it can really excel. This is kind of the only movie where Hulk feels like an actual character instead of being a big kind of punching special effect. But that's kind of damning with fine praise, because Hulk has a smidge more character, and then he's just relegated to being the big punching bag. He kind of goes through an off-screen character arc where Sakaar becomes his new home, and they love him because he's, big and powerful, and they really respect that kind of thing on Sakaar. But if you're someone who's read the Planet Hulk storyline, you're probably going to not like this movie very much, because a lot of the most interesting things about the Planet Hulk storyline just are not here, and they can't be here because this movie would be 5 hours long if they did all of that stuff. But that's a really good showcase of what I mean. The Hulk stuff is fine. It's not offensive. It's not great, but it doesn't really reach anything near its full potential. And like I said, this movie is very much focused on making Thor stylishly way more interesting than it's ever been. Because one of the biggest problems with Thor movies is that they've always been really fucking boring. They're the fantasy setting of the MCU, and they're so fucking boring. It's actually insane. Unless you're one of those super big MCU fantards who jacks off to a picture of Kevin Feige before going into bed, I do not know how the actual fuck you can physically pretend to make yourself care about the Thor corner of the MCU. It is not fucking possible. And that's not another big part of the problem with this movie, where they kind of expect you to care about Odin and Asgard and what it means to be a king, but it's also nothing, and you don't care about the Thor movies before this one, then none of it really works. They kind of try to play up Odin kind of like the comics do, where Odin is a dude with big secrets, that he's not very much a morally nice person, that he's somewhere in between Loki and Thor. Thor is very much, the classical hero, and Loki is the backstabbing douchebag, and Odin is kind of in between them, where he's capable of being, Aragorn, but also Tywin Lannister, all in one person. But the problem is, like I said, the Thor corner is really shit, and it's really boring, and Odin, as portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, is pretty much a nothing character. He just looks bored and yells things a lot, and the movie has a really big problem where it thinks you care about the Thor films before this, but you don't care unless you're an aforementioned MCU tard. So that's kind of a big issue, and the movie kind of tries to act like a sequel to The Dark World. One thing with The Dark World was the whole question of what it means to be a king. Can you be a king and a good man? And they kind of try to bring it back up here, but like I said, it does work because you just don't give a shit about Asgard. So that thing doesn't work. The style of the film is very much Guardians of the Galaxy inspired, which I like. I like the Guardians style. It certainly gives Thor a style, but I think what makes the movie kind of stick out from Guardians in this respect is the fact that the humor is quite noticeably different. James Gunn is a dick jokes guy, And that's fine. Everybody likes dick jokes. I mean, I watched South Park for Christ's sake. There are like 9 billion dick jokes in that, and that's fine. They say fuck and shit and that kind of thing. And that's James Gunn's level of humor, and that's fine when it works, which it didn't in Guardians 2. But in this movie, there is very rarely any kind of joke like that. Most of the humor is a bit more highbrow, and it's a bit more crazy and unexpected. And a lot of it is just the performers doing a good performance. Chris Hemsworth has always been called a dude who has really good comedic timing, and this movie makes really, really good use of that. And in fact, this is the only movie where Thor is actually kind of interesting as a character. He actually has something in the material to work with, and that is very much appreciated. Jeff Goldblum is pretty freaking crazy as the Grandmaster. His performance is really weird, really kind of disturbing sometimes, and it really works in the more comedic segments. Tom Hiddleston, once again, he's really good as Loki, but he's fallen into the same problem that comic book Loki has, and that's nobody knows what the fuck Loki's role is supposed to be. And because Loki kind of constantly flip-flops between being hero, villain, and anti-hero, you have this character who kind of sucks ass at all three of those things. In the hero camp, he's nowhere near as effective as Thor or Valkyrie or even Heimdall, I would say. As a villain, he's just kind of become a parody of himself. And I know a lot of people still love Tom Hiddleston as Loki, but the novelty of the performance isn't there anymore. It's the same problem Loki has in the comic books, where they keep constantly trying to switch him around and have him do this and this and that, and sometimes they make it work, but the movies have to decide what the fuck Loki's role in this universe is. What is he? Or if you're gonna do a character whose allegiances go with the wind, who can at the snap of a moment completely change how he operates and who he operates with, you should probably go all the way for it, because whenever Loki tries to stab anyone in the back here, he completely fails utterly in comedic fashion, and he's become really predictable and boring. And the movie does kind of bring it up that Loki's whole shtick has gotten old, but if you're gonna keep him as a dude whose morality is very flexible and very all over the place, you should probably have him be effective at the various sides he's trying to play instead of making him suck at all of them, because all you have is a directionless character who's kind of lost his novelty and can't be effective at absolutely anything. So that is a problem with Loki in this movie, and it's not just an MCU problem, it's a problem in the comic books, where the whole song and dance between Thor and Loki is well the fuck played out, and we don't need to see any more of it. Karl Urban as Scourge, he gives a really kind of good performance with what he's given, but I really feel like his character could have easily been cut out of the movie and you'd lose nothing. The same thing with Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie. It's fine. What they do with her is kind of interesting. It is kind of a female character role that we don't really see that often. But like Scourge, she's very underwritten. Her whole connection to Hela basically means nothing. If you were expecting the Valkyries to play an integral role in the backstory of Hela and to matter in the story of Hela, don't, because it doesn't. The whole Valkyries fighting Hela thing is literally a few seconds of cool-looking flashbacks. Nothing Valkyrie does matters in beating Hela. Hela doesn't even have a moment where she remembers Valkyrie or anything. So Valkyrie is very much a character who could have been cut out of the film entirely, and you'd lose pretty much nothing. In fact, Sith is absent from this movie, and there's no explanation for it. And so I think that if you needed a female protagonist in the group, you really easily could have just given it to Sith, because like I said, she's gone from this movie with no explanation, and if you needed that quota filled, there she is. So, yeah, what else is there even to say? Oh yeah, Hela. They did what I fucking predicted 2 years ago. See, when Thor Ragnarok, was announced, I fucking called it that they would give Cate Blanchett absolutely nothing to do. And Hela is just as boring and underwritten as Malekith was in Thor: The Dark World. The problem that not the problem, the solution rather, is that they got Kate fucking Blanchett to do her, and Kate Blanchett is doing a really good time. She's having a good time doing this role. It's a nothing character with those generic cliche bad guy motivations I've ever seen in my life. But the way Kate Blanchett acts as her, the way she moves, the way she looks, the way she's got this really, vicious energy about her, it's all really down to the actor and the way the visual effects do her. And she's pretty much the best kind of representation of this movie. Under the surface, on paper, it's all just kind of middle of the road, whatever the fuck level shit. But when you give this kind of material to people who know how to elevate that kind of stuff, you get a damn good time. But once again, like I said, Hill is not really great as a character. It really does hinge all on Kate Blanchett playing her. And I guarantee you, if Kate Blanchett was not cast as Hela, the role would be just as boring and nothing as Malekith was. And that is kind of disappointing because, like a lot of the pre-release material for this movie, I actually expect them to maybe do something with Hela, but they don't. Like, she's good for a fight scene, and she's good for making threats and kind of being a bitch, and that's pretty much it. And if that's enough for you, that's fine. But if the fucking press are gonna call this like the best Marvel villain ever in a world where fucking Magneto exists, then no, it doesn't work. That's a lie, and you should probably shut the hell up already. And then we have a few, tertiary characters like Korg. If you've read Planet Hulk, you're gonna hate this version of Korg. He's nothing but just kind of a generic, jokey character. Whereas in the comic, he had, a completely different motivation. And look, and I know I'm one of those guys who says you don't have to be like the comic books. And I actually do appreciate some of the things they change about Sakaar in this movie. And the way they kind of work it in to the overall narrative, I don't think is completely bad. But if there's one way you can annoy the crap out of me, it's to take a character who's kind of has some personality and some actual depth and make a complete joke out of them. And that's kind of what they do to Korg here. Meek is also in the movie, and he's just kind of a cool-looking special effect that occasionally fights people. So, yeah, there that is. So if you're an actual fan of Planet Hulk, I imagine the Hulk stuff is gonna annoy the ever-loving shit out of you. I'm just kind of more disappointed that it had to be smashed together with a Thor threequel, because Planet Hulk could be a really good movie all on its own. And I really think they fucked up by putting it like this. And I know that there's the universal distribution rights problem, that Marvel can't make a solo Hulk outing. But Jesus Christ, either do them or don't do them. Don't do this weird halfway point where you can kind of realize some parts of the story, but you can't realize other parts. Especially because it's one of the few stories where Hulk actually is worth a fuck as a character. So that is disappointing for this film. So, yeah, that's kind of my overall review of Thor Ragnarok. It's, on paper, just as kind of meh as The Dark World was. But, once again, I said, the way the movie is directed, the way it's shot, the style it has, and the performances that it brings to the table, I think it all elevates the material. This is, if Guardians 2 is a bad movie that's trying to pass itself off as a really good movie, then this is a middle-of-the-road flick that's trying to pass itself off as a pretty damn good time. Even people who really enjoy this movie obviously know that this movie has no really big aspirations. It's all kind of about the style and not really the story. And that's kind of why the story is so underwhelming in a lot of respects. That really disappoints me. I really was hoping for a film that would narratively wise make the Thor movies very interesting, and that's still not really here. But if they do make more Thor movies, I think they do have an interesting enough direction to go forward with it that it could finally maybe be narratively interesting. But honestly, if you ask me, if you're looking for a movie that's probably going to do the whole questions about what does it mean to be a king, is a nation a people, or are people the nation, and all these kind of questions about ruling and royalty and all that stuff, I honestly think Black Panther is going to do that considerably better. Black Panther is shaping up to be the next Winter Soldier, I feel, and I feel like it's going to do a lot of the things that this movie kind of alludes to considerably better because it's going to actually focus on them instead of using it as kind of story fluff to sound deeper than it really is. So that is my review of Thor Ragnarok. It's the best MCU flick thus far, which doesn't really mean much. It's not anywhere close as being as good as the first trailer implied it was going to be, but it's a good enough time. It doesn't beat you over the head with the humor. The humor actually really, really works 95% of the time. The 5% of the rest, where it annoys the shit out of you, it's going to really annoy you, but that's like 90% less than the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, so I'm just going to count myself lucky for this not being another obnoxious as hell movie. So, what did you think about Thor Ragnarok? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you think it's kind of middle of the road, but it's a really good time anyway? What are your thoughts? Please comment down below, and hopefully I'll see you on the next video. Bye.